The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
It is now 7 o'clock. I'd like to call this Planning Commission meeting to order. Can we get the roll call, please?
Chairperson Boschert,
Here.
Vice Chair McConnell,
Come on camera here.
Commissioner Carpenter,
Present.
Commissioner Colling,
Present.
Commissioner Dunn,
Excused?
Commissioner Tomacek,
Present.
Commissioner Zhang,
Present.
Commissioner Zhang, could you do that one more time for us, please?
Present.
Thank you. And Commissioner Torres,
Present.
thank you. Roll call is complete.
And Commissioner Mayo is absent also, correct?
Yes, thank you for stating that. Yes.
Excused. Okay, we have a quorum and both alternates will be voting tonight. I'd like to consider the minutes of the previous meeting. Do we have an amendment, or excuse me, do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
I make a motion to accept the meeting minutes for October 13th, 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Tomacek. Do we have a second?
I second that.
Thank you. Commissioner Jeong, yes, we'll do a voice vote on this. All in favor, please say aye. Do we need a roll call? Okay. Do we need a roll call, Jennifer, or is this just voice vote?
Roll call, please.
Okay,
Chairperson Boschert,
aye.
Vice Chair McConnell.
Aye.
Vice Chair McConnell is in favor. Commissioner Carpenter.
Aye.
Commissioner Carpenter is in favor. Commissioner Calling.
Aye.
Commissioner Calling is in favor. Commissioner Tomacek.
Aye.
Commissioner Tomacek is in favor. Commissioner Zhang.
Aye.
Commissioner Zhang is in favor. Commissioner Torres.
Aye.
Commissioner Torres is in favor. Vote is complete.
Minutes are approved unanimously. Thank you. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, comments were accepted electronically and via voicemail and were delivered to the Planning Commission and posted on the public agenda packet online prior to the meeting. Those who wish to give comments and signed up in advance per the online guidelines will be called upon in order to speak during the live meeting. There are 2 items on this evening's agenda, with only one being a public hearing. The first is a presentation of the proposed revised oil and gas land use ordinance. I believe that's Jacob Kaza. You have a presentation for us.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the Westminster Planning Commission. My name is Jacob Kaza. I am a planner with the city's planning division. It is my pleasure to be presenting to you this evening. Tonight, I will be introducing the proposed revisions to the city's oil and gas regulations. Next slide. In the fall of 2018, City Council directed staff to analyze whether the city's existing oil and gas regulations met the needs of the city and its residents. The current regulations, located in Westminster Municipal Code 11414, were adopted in 1997 and have not been modified since then. Over the course of the last 23 years, the oil and gas industry has expanded its use of technologies such as horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, which has changed how the industry operates. Also in 2018, the city received notice from the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission that an operator had filed for permits in and around Stanley Lake Regional Park. These applications, which have been withdrawn, highlighted some concerns that the community had regarding potential new oil and gas uses. Lastly, new state legislation has increased the city's ability to regulate oil and gas uses within our jurisdiction. The passage of Senate Bill 19-181, which amended the Oil and Gas Conservation Act, gives municipalities the authority to regulate the siting of oil and gas facilities. Next slide. The City Attorney's Office identified the regulations developed and adopted by the City and County of Broomfield as a good model for the city to follow in its drafting of revised regulations. Having regulations that are similar to our neighboring jurisdictions will create a more level regulatory field for operators when they are looking for locations for oil and gas facilities. The city has hired Elizabeth Parenhos of Daylone Law, Inc. to advise the city in its drafting of the new regulations. Elizabeth is with us tonight and she will be available to answer questions that you may have after the presentation. Next slide. City staff from 4 departments were part of the core team that reviewed and helped draft the proposed regulations. The city departments include the City Attorney's Office, Community Development, Parks, Recreation and Libraries, and Public Works and Utilities. Staff from the fire department and the city's risk management team have also reviewed specific sections of the code on emergency preparedness plans and insurance and financial security requirements. Next slide. Over the next 3 slides, I will highlight a brief comparison of the proposed regulations against the city's existing regulations, the proposed COGCC regulations, the City and County of Broomfield regulations, and Adams County's regulations. The City and County of Broomfield adopted its regulations in May of 2020. Adams County adopted their regulations in the late summer of 2019. The COGCC is still in the process of rulemaking and has not yet finalized all the changes to the regulations which were mandated under Senate Bill 19-181. A larger comparison of the city's existing and proposed regulations is provided in attachment 2. One of the more significant changes staff is proposing is increasing the setbacks of oil and gas facilities from 350 feet to 1,000 feet. This is similar to what Adams County established last year. Broomfield has adopted a more restrictive setback of 2,000 feet. In the September release of the COGCC's 600 series rulemaking, they are proposing a standard 2,000 foot setback with a set of conditions that could reduce the setback to 500 feet. Air quality is another area that the staff is looking to enhance our regulations. Staff are proposing to establish air monitoring requirements that are very similar to what is required by both Adams and Broomfield. The COGCC and Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment will also be increasing their regulations around air quality. Next slide. Staff are also proposing creating protection zones to protect resources that are critical to our city. The first two are the Stanley Lake Source Water Protection Zone and the Woolman Creek Reservoir Protection Zone. The Stanley Lake Zone would exclude all oil and gas facilities from within the Stanley Lake bypass system. It is critical that we protect Stanley Lake from risks, as it is the sole drinking water source for the city of Westminster and some of our neighboring communities. The Woolman Creek Zone would exclude all oil and gas facilities from the Woolman Creek Reservoir System, which captures runoff from Rocky Flats. This reservoir system is critical to the city's water system as it allows the city to monitor the runoff for plutonium levels and allows the city to divert unsafe water away from Stanley Lake as necessary. The habitat protection areas would designate land the city determines as having a high value and high quantity of wildlife and/or plant habitat. These areas include known nesting sites and habitat for threatened and endangered species and include areas generally within 300 feet of a water body or water course on city-owned land. These areas can be modified in the future by city staff as habitat areas change over time. These new protections are shown in attachment 3. In our last comparison, next slide. In our last comparison, I will highlight some of the procedural changes we are proposing to the city's review process. The first is a new requirement that an operator go through a pre-application meeting before they can submit their application. The city requires this for all other development review in the city, and the new requirement is similar to what is required by both Broomfield and Adams County. The second is the requirement to notice the public. Staff is proposing a 2,640 foot notification radius, similar to both Broomfield and Adams County. The third requirement is an alternative site analysis. This would require an operator to provide 3 proposed locations for their facility at the time of their pre-application meeting. This will allow the city to help the operator find a location that best meets the approval criteria of the proposed regulations. This analysis is a standard requirement for the COGCC, Broomfield, and Adams County. Next slide. Together, the regulations create an overlay of areas that the city would consider not eligible for oil and gas facilities. In attachment 3, the city has compiled a map that shows the proposed 1,000 foot setback, the protection zones, and habitat protection areas. The map does not show the setbacks from buildings outside the city's municipal limits, as those buildings have not been mapped in the city's GIS. The map also does not reflect the regulations from federally owned lands or the COGCC and is provided only as an informational graphic. Next slide. Staff have outlined the future steps for the review of the proposed regulations. Tomorrow night, October 28th, we will be presenting these regulations to the Environmental Advisory Board. On November 16th, staff are scheduled to present the regulations to City Council at a study session. Following these presentations and any additional public comments that are received, staff will revise the regulations as needed. A final draft of the ordinance will be presented to the Planning Commission for a review and recommendation on December 22nd, and then at City Council for a first reading of the ordinance on January 11th. This proposed schedule may be modified as needed to accommodate proposed changes to the draft regulations and to address comments. The city firmly believes in public outreach and for residents to be able to have a voice in their community. An informational website has been developed for the update to the oil and gas regulations. This website will continue to be updated throughout the review process. Staff have provided notice of the update through the weekly and will be providing notice in the next edition of the city edition. The best way for a resident or interested party to provide feedback is by contacting me directly. My contact information is provided on this slide and is up on the website. Next slide. Staff believes that the proposed oil and gas regulations as currently drafted protect and minimize adverse impacts to public health, safety, and welfare and the environment. Thus, the proposed regulations support the visionary leadership, effective governance, and proactive regional collaboration city strategic plan goal. The process to adopt this code and review future oil and gas facilities will involve significant community engagement, which supports the vibrant, inclusive, and engaged community goal. Measures taken to ensure that oil and gas facilities have minimized adverse impacts to the community and the environment satisfy the beautiful, desirable, safe, and environmentally responsible city goal. The regulations would allow the development of oil and gas facilities while also protecting existing businesses and the community, which ensures the dynamic, diverse economy goal is met. Increasing the review fee and adding a provision to collect fees for third-party monitoring and reviews ensures that this financially sustainable government providing excellence in city services goal is met. Thank you for your attention, and the city staff would be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And with us tonight, I have several city staff members, and as I mentioned earlier, we also have Elizabeth Parenhos, our consulting attorney.
Thank you, Jacob. And I will take comments from planning commissioners. But first, I'd like to say I like the regulations you have set out so far. The only comment I have is that I would like to see the city coordinate with the COGCC on setbacks and possibly get a standard that's common throughout the state. Any other commissioners would like to comment on this?
I would, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, thank you to the staff for presenting this. My first comment is that I believe this is mostly unnecessary, and for the amount of gas wells that actually exist in the city of Westminster, I think that we're wasting a lot of taxpayer money dealing with a problem that's not even a problem. We have the only existing wells are up north of 136th Avenue, if I'm not mistaken, by Huron. And while
Your mic.
can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, how much did you miss?
about 10 seconds.
Okay. We only have up by 136th Avenue is where the wells actually are. So I think I know that they've applied for this area in the Stanley Lake, and I don't really believe that's really going to happen. That said, if we're going to get in the nitty gritty of the actual ordinance as proposed, number one, I disagree with raising the review fee to $5,000 when the other review fee is by $1,000 for a typical ODP. I don't think that that's appropriate. Also, you're having 2,640 feet of notification. That's a half-mile notification. Yet for every other project, we only are notifying within 300 feet usually. So most people don't get notified. That was a problem I had with our last hearing. And I think that's not that notifying everyone in a half-mile of project is a problem for this, but I think that we ought to expand the notification area for the other projects so people are aware. And if I'm looking at this map correctly, it looks like we are basically disallowing any oil and gas development in the city, which, again, like I said, don't have a lot of oil and gas development in the city, so it's probably a waste of time and money that we're actually looking at this. But I really question that we're just going to blanket, say, no oil and gas development in Westminster, which is basically what the setback map is. And finally, I get the protection for Stanley Lake because it's a drinking water system. Woman Creek, I don't agree with because it all goes into a containing pond at the west end of the Westminster Hills open space dog park, and that's all contained. So anything in that drainage is going to be contained. So I don't think that we need to have the same protection zone there that we have at Stanley Lake. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioners wish to comment?
There we go. Sorry. I do, please.
Commissioner Collins.
So I kind of agree with Commissioner, with Dave on this. The likelihood of anybody developing oil and gas within the city of Westminster is so low. And with the approval of SB 181 and with the COGCC, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, moving forward with their regulations that are extremely robust, and those aren't even completed yet. So those will be done January, I think 15th is their new deadline to get everything done. Their new air quality standards, their protection measures they have in their notifications are very robust. I think that the city is well protected by even those regulations. The likelihood of anybody developing in Westminster is I think nil. Because the sweet spot for oil and gas is in Weld County. Everybody knows that. There's really nothing in this area. So I feel like it is, I think it's a little bit of waste of money to spend the time and hire an attorney and go through this detail. And then the staff that has to get up to speed to understand it. It's a very detailed industry. And I think that the COGCC has done a really great job at improving the regulations, and that City of Westminster doesn't need to duplicate that. So I don't feel like these are necessary personally. That's my opinion. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? I would like to make one more quick comment, and that is, I think the city is being proactive, and I think that's a good idea. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with other districts and the state, so we should probably get our act together and have some regulations ready to go. If there are no more comments or questions, we will end this portion of the Planning Commission meeting. I will wait for 1 minute to see if there are any further questions. Seeing that there are no more comments or questions, we are moving on to item 3B, approval of rezoning and preliminary development plan for 3630 West 73rd Avenue, 7287 Lowell Boulevard, and 7277 Lowell Boulevard, also known as Harris Park Block 43 Senior Housing. Nathan Lawrence, I believe this is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Boschert, and good evening to all the planning commissioners. My name again is Nathan Lawrence. I'm a senior planner with the city. I will be presenting the staff analysis of the rezoning and preliminary development plan for Harris Park Block 43 Senior Housing. A number of additional staff members are with me here virtually tonight, and they include Rita McConnell, the planning manager, John McConnell, principal planner, Heath Klein, transportation engineer, Michael Wright, principal planner, principal engineer, and Nicole Ankeny, senior landscape architect. They'll be here and available to answer any questions or clarify comments after our presentation. The members of the economic development staff are also in attendance, and they will be introduced along with the applicants portion of the presentation. So tonight I'll be presenting the City of Westminster's request for approval of the rezoning to Planned Unit Development, or PUD, and accompanying Preliminary Development Plan, or PDP. Approval of this rezoning and PDP would allow for the construction of a multifamily senior housing development on Harris Park, Block 43. Next slide, please. Thank you, Matt. The subject property is comprised of 3 parcels that are located on the southwest corner of 73rd Avenue and Lowell Boulevard. These parcels are addressed at 3630 West 73rd Avenue, 7287 Lowell Boulevard, and 7277 Lowell Boulevard. To orient you all, the Penguin Building is located directly adjacent to the property to the south. The Community Resources and Housing Development Corporation headquarters is located to the north, just across 73rd Avenue, and Hidden Lake High School is situated directly across Lowell to the east. Next slide, please. The agenda memo and its associated attachments have been properly posted on the city's website. To bring this project before you, a staff agenda memo has been created, and tonight's public hearing has been properly noticed. Public notices were mailed, posted on the subject property, and published in the Westminster window. These items are hereby entered into the public record at this time. Next slide, please. Section 1153 of the Westminster Municipal Code contains criteria that form the basis of consideration for approval of rezonings. Staff finds that the applicant's rezoning application generally meets these criteria. The subject property is currently zoned C1 commercial, and the applicant is requesting again to rezone to PUD. For a PUD zone, land uses are delineated on an approved PDP, which must be consistent with the property's comprehensive plan land use designation. All of the land uses proposed by the applicant are in conformance with the property's comprehensive plan designation of traditional mixed-use neighborhood development, or TMUND. A preliminary analysis of street drainage and utility system capacity has been completed, and all improvements required of this proposal will be constructed and completed along with the construction of the proposed multifamily project. Next slide, please. Section 11514 of the Westminster Municipal Code contains 10 criteria that form the basis of consideration for approval of PDP amendments. Staff finds that the PDP application generally meets these criteria. The first 3 criteria relate to whether the PDP conforms with applicable codes, follows appropriate planning principles, and identifies any exceptions sought. As mentioned in the last slide, the comprehensive plan designates the subject property as TMUND, which encourages the development of mixed-use walkable communities. The applicant is requesting senior multifamily residential land use in addition to commercial office, commercial retail, personal services, and live-work uses, which again all comply with the TMUND comprehensive plan designation. Beyond compliance with the comprehensive plan, compliance with the architectural and site design standards listed in the TMUND design guidelines will be required for any official development plan, or ODP. that is submitted for development on the property. The proposed site plan and building envelope are regulated by the preliminary development plan. Building setbacks around the site have been modeled after those found in traditional urban neighborhoods and mirror the setbacks of neighboring properties. The front setback is proposed to be 10 feet from Lowell Boulevard, matching the CRHCC building that is again located across 73rd to the north. Side and rear setbacks will be 0 feet, mimicking the pattern of traditional neighborhood design prevalent along Lowell Boulevard. 3 exceptions from the T1 design guidelines are being requested. The first exception deals with a reduction of the front setback mentioned from 20 feet to 10 feet along 73rd, which again will fit with the immediate neighborhood context. The second exception requests a reduction in width of the required landscape strip along Lowell Boulevard from 8 feet to 7 feet in order to match the existing streetscape along Lowell. The third and final exception requests the elimination of the requirement that a minimum 1/3 of the on-site parking spaces be covered or inside of a garage. And so parking for most of the other multifamily buildings in the area currently is provided in uncovered surface parking lots. So this request is again in keeping with the neighborhood context. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Pardon me. Criteria 4 through 6 ensure that the project is compatible with surrounding development and does not adversely affect future development. Staff finds that the PDP application generally meets these criteria. The T1 design guidelines establish a maximum of 18 dwelling units per acre, with an allowance for an increase in density per approval by City Council. A comparative study was done of the surrounding Harris Park core area. The density of nearby multifamily developments ranges from 17 to 43 units per acre. The proposed project would be limited to 34 units per acre, which would allow for a maximum of 20 residential units to be constructed on the property. This density sits within the range of other developments in the Harris Park core area. The addition of a residential land use to the current commercial property will not be detrimental to existing or future land uses, as a mix of residential and commercial land uses is already prevalent in the Harris Park core. The T1 design guidelines do not specify a maximum building height, but encourage scale capability with the surrounding neighborhood. The applicant is proposing a 40-foot maximum building height, which would allow up to a 3-story building. This scale would be in keeping with the surrounding neighborhood, which contains a mix of 1-, 2-, and 3-story buildings. Parking for the proposed development will be situated completely to the rear of the project and will be fully screened from the view of adjacent rights of way. Parking will be provided in accordance with the requirements of the WMC at a ratio of 1 off-street space per unit, with 1 guest space provided per 5 units on street along the Lowell frontage of the property. Next slide, please. The final 4 criteria ensure that the PDP ensures safe and free traffic flow and identifies any land dedications that may be needed. Staff finds that the PDP application generally meets these criteria as well. All of the streetscapes surrounding the project will be designed to match the existing streetscapes along both 73rd and Lowell, and the quality of the pedestrian network will be enhanced the upgrade to these sidewalks surrounding the site. The only vehicular access point to the site will be from the rear alley, which will minimize the traffic impacts on 73rd Avenue and Lowell. The PDP includes all needed standards of approval to ensure that reasonable and required expectations of any future ODP will be met. Furthermore, as mentioned, compliance with the TMUN design guidelines will be required with review and approval of any future ODP submittal. Next slide, please. As a result of staff's thorough analysis of the rezoning and PDP criteria set forth in sections 1153 and 1154 of the Westminster Municipal Code, staff recommends holding a public hearing to review the proposed rezoning and PDP, and that the Planning Commission recommend approval of these applications to City Council. Next slide, please. Staff also believes that the proposed rezoning and PDP amendment meet 3 goals of the city's strategic plan. It exhibits visionary leadership, effective governance, and proactive regional collaboration. It supports the goal of creating a vibrant, inclusive, and engaged community, and promotes a beautiful, desirable, safe, and environmentally responsible city. Next slide, please. So that concludes the portion, the staff presentation of the rezoning and preliminary development plan application for the Harris Park Block 43 Senior Housing. Jenny Grafton, Economic Development and Development Manager with the Department of Economic Development, will now begin the applicant's portion of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Good evening, Chairman Boschert and Commissioners. Again, my name is Jenny Grafton, Economic Policy and Development Manager in the Department of Economic Development for the city. I'm going to introduce some others who are actively participating in the presentation and question and answers this evening. Joining me tonight are Chase Evans, the Real Estate and Development Administrator in Economic Development, Pat Lee, Environmental Engineer with Strategic Environmental Management, Arturo Alvarado, Executive Director of Community Resources and Housing Development Corporation, and Gabe Bergeron, Senior Associate with Studio Completiva. I'd also like to acknowledge that a number of others contributed to this work tonight. In particular, Molly Tayer served as the project manager on behalf of Economic Development. At present, the city is the owner of the subject property that was acquired with federal funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, more commonly known as HUD. The use of those funds requires that a national objective be met in development of this site. And for that reason, the city has had a memorandum of understanding with Community Resources and Housing Development Corporation, also referred to as CRHDC, since 2018 to pursue the development of affordable senior housing in fulfillment of obligation for those federal funds. Partners in that effort also include Adams County, who has committed funding to the project, and Studio Completiva, the design consultant. In a moment, I will turn the presentation of the proposed development over to CRHDC and the architect, and I would also like to introduce Pat Lee of Strategic Environmental Systems. Mr. Lee is a professional engineer with extensive experience in environmental management and brownfield remediation. He has been the city's environmental engineering consultant on numerous projects, including this one, and is here and available to answer any of the more technical questions that the commission may have. I'm going to pause for just a moment as I believe there are some additional slides to accompany this portion of the presentation. Thank you. And actually, we can advance to the next slide. Wonderful. So I would just like to offer a high-level summary of the property to provide context for the commission tonight. The 3 parcels that comprise the project site were acquired between 2004 and 2012 in separate transactions with the intent of catalyzing redevelopment of the area, as well as mitigating environmental contamination from the adjacent site to the north, where CRHDC headquarters are now located. Underground gas tanks were removed from that northwest corner of 73rd and Lowell in 1992 but they had leaked. The Colorado Division of Oil and Public Safety has been responsible for the ongoing monitoring and remediation of the spill. The city, with the assistance of Pat Lee, submitted an application for the state's voluntary cleanup plan, sometimes referred to as a VCUP, which was approved by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment this past spring. That plan details the appropriate steps needed to remediate the site for the proposed redevelopment as housing. And all of those documents are available on a project website within economic development that we have dedicated for community development block grant projects. On September 28th, City Council approved a purchase and sale agreement between the city and CRHDC, contingent upon obtaining the necessary approvals for rezoning with the preliminary development plan before the commission tonight, as well as approval of an official development plan subsequently. Furthermore, the city will bear the responsibility for demolition of the existing blighted structures and site remediation as evidenced in that aerial photograph. The only reason for the delay in those actions has been the processes required by HUD with regard to the various environmental reports required. With that background, I'm going to turn this over to Arturo Alvarado, the Executive Director for CRHDC.
Good evening. If we could move forward the slide, I'd appreciate it. We have a set of slides too for the CRHDC, but I'm extremely excited to have the opportunity to introduce CRHDC and goals of development with Harris Park Senior Apartments with the Planning Commission this evening. At CRHDC, we believe in a Colorado where every community is a place of opportunity with safe, affordable, and attainable housing for all. CRHDC turns 50 next year. We have an extensive history of developing housing across the state of Colorado, both single and multifamily housing, including a number of senior affordable housing complexes. CRHDC has been proud to call Westminster home for the past 26 years, and we have taken part in and led community conversations and heard from a number of interested parties about the potential development of affordable senior housing on this space we're talking about this evening. We are delighted to have this unique opportunity to propose the development of affordable senior rental housing in our own backyard, as our main office is right across the street at 73rd and Lowell. Next slide. So in the state, we currently own 5 senior affordable rental housing developments. We pride ourselves working with our development team and architects in developing beautiful housing developments where seniors can call home. We build our housing developments to fit the local community and landscape. On this slide, you see a number of our developments we have developed across the state. A number of our developments have received state and national awards for design and use, and we're very proud about that. And we have a long history, our management team, of managing our own properties with years of experience in that area with compliance as well. Next slide, please. So CRHDC looks forward to the opportunity to develop healthy housing with access to opportunity for seniors 55 and older that is safe, affordable, and attainable. CRHDC has a history of building high quality and high performing housing options that are assets to the community. We will continue that approach with Harris Park Senior Apartments so seniors have the opportunity to age in place. And in fact, a number of local residents have contacted us about the proposed development and are interested in calling Harris Park Senior Apartments home. The development is within walkable distance to neighborhood amenities, close to public transportation, social opportunities, including in an ideal location to the mature adult center, the arts district, and access to healthy food options. Housing will be affordable and attainable. Rents will be tiered to attract residents of income levels up to $84,000 for a one-person household, and we will have units at 50% AMI, 80% AMI, and up to 120% AMI. A market study we conducted indicated that there are over 2,500 renter households in the market area, with approximately half with incomes at or below the proposed restrictions for the property. However, the market study also indicated there are currently no senior rental options at 80% AMI in the market area. Harris Park Senior Apartments will help to meet affordable housing needs in the community and provide a healthy place to call home for numerous residents. With that, I would like to turn over to Gabe Bergeron with their history, with Studio Completiva's history of designing senior affordable rental housing and working with local nonprofit community development organizations like ours, CRHDC, we're happy to have Studio Completiva as our architect and partners to develop Harris Park Senior Apartments. Gabe, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the proposed development further.
Great, thank you, Arturo. Yes, so if you advance to the next slide, I can continue along here. So yes, so as mentioned, my name is Gabe Bergeron, and I'm a senior associate project manager and architect with Studio Completiva. And we're a firm that we're in our now 25th year of existence, and we aim at, come back there, at really inspiring extraordinary lives through design. And that's our kind of mantra. We're a mission-based architecture firm, and we love working with groups like CRHDC, who are really aimed at how to make a difference in people's lives. And at the same time, as architects and planners, we're very focused on how do we do so in a way that simultaneously improves the neighborhoods where we're designing. So with that, we have kind of, I would say we have a context sensitivity at all levels in the projects we work on. So if you jump to the next slide, Nathan went through and described the various elements of this site. And so just wanted to give everyone a visual of what we're talking about. And so Lowell Boulevard running north-south on the right side of the site there, and 73rd Avenue to the north. This site is really an interesting one because it's right at the corner of these two streets, and has this great potential to be a gateway of sorts to the neighborhood along 73rd. And that's one of our goals here is how do we do a project that is neighborhood sensitive, the right scale, and announces that you're coming into really a special neighborhood. And so, so as Nathan mentioned, we're putting the parking and access to the parking off of the alley to the southwest corner of the site. And this is to get a good right-of-way experience for pedestrians who are walking all along Lowell and along 73rd there. And so we're also considering the fabric of the neighborhood and thinking of the buildings to the north there and how they've established a fabric of two-story residential buildings with a bit of an announcement at the north, or at the corner there. We're aiming to just pull that fabric, if you will, down across 73rd and into this block. So with that, I think if you jump to the next slide, I'll highlight a few more items. One of the things that we really love is the celebration, the potential celebration of historic Westminster, and what is the character and the typologies in the neighborhood. And so as we consider the rezoning here, we're very, very interested in the neighborhood context. And so there's the Penguin building in the middle, and we love this false front Western building. It's a great typology and something that we're thinking of as we move further along in the process. And there on the left at the middle is the building that is directly to the north of 73rd. And you can see that it has this corner element, which we would also be responding to kind of announce that it's a gateway and it's leading into a cool neighborhood. And then there at the bottom left is there's a sculpture park and some of the arts elements of the neighborhood. So as we move forward, we're also thinking, how do we really celebrate the arts in this project? So next slide. So speaking to senior living and the changing nature of how seniors live and thrive today. Actually, my boss, our principal and founder, Young Cho, when we started this project and started to consider design opportunities, he said, you know what, this is where I want to live as I age. And it's because it's this really great scale. We're talking about a two-story residential settlement with the potential for interior courtyards, a nice urban presence along Lowell, and the potential for really defining a small scale community. And so, so that's kind of embedded in what we're up to and what we're excited about here. So next slide. So this is just very early scale or early stage thoughts on massing, and it's evolving. We're looking at how the potential of this zoning could translate, but what we're oriented here towards is a view, if you will, from the northeast, and so Lowell Boulevard running on one side and 73rd on the other. And so we're thinking about how do we respond to Lowell Boulevard on the one hand, a more busier street and an urban edge, and the examples on the left there are what we've been excited about, some form of townhome that similarly to the projects to the project just to the north of 73rd, we would have stoops and a connection to Lowell Boulevard with that type of nice presence there. We are considering right now that it may be units that are flats, one unit above the other, but the lower unit would have a doorway and stoop to Lowell Boulevard, giving it that townhome expression. And then if you jump to the next slide. And then at the corner, we're considering the community room for this settlement, for this group of senior housing, to occupy that corner so that the active community functions are there at the gateway, and that we're kind of showcasing the life of the building. And then as you move along 73rd, we're looking at how to give some relief to that edge, and in keeping, we believe, with the fabric of 73rd, that there are ins and outs and a variety of scales along that street. So that, I think, highlights some of the character and the major moves and intent that we're looking at and what we're hoping to set up for our next steps. So I want to hand it back to Jenny now, and to conclude our presentation here.
Thank you, Gabe. I think that's all that we have to present, and we'll turn this back over to follow the process as laid out for this evening.
Any questions from commissioners for the applicants? I have a quick question. Do you have any idea when this project will break ground?
I'm going to let Arturo Alvarado take that one. As far as the city process is concerned, we don't foresee any delays that would prevent this from being a 2021 project.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah,
Alyssa.
Sorry, I did have a question. Just regarding the landscaping a little bit, if you guys have more details on that, because I know if it's going to be an enclosed building, are you guys going to allow pets? I know those may seem like silly questions, but we've leased up buildings before, and parking and pets have always kind of been a big issue for neighboring communities, including people throwing trash. Can you guys speak a little bit more on those questions?
This is Jenny Grafton. I might ask Nathan Lawrence actually to weigh in here. I believe that that level of detail will be more fully expressed in the ODP process.
Yeah, I mean, specifically to pets, that won't be really addressed in any of the city approval documents. That's really going to be left up to the property owner and manager. So I'll probably let Arturo speak to that. As far as landscaping, there will be landscaping requirements per our landscape code that will be enforced just as you do on all of our projects. And as far as parking, the parking requirements, as I mentioned in my presentation, will meet the city's standards for senior housing, which is 1 space per unit, plus 1 per 5 for guest parking. But I'll let Arturo speak to the pet question.
Thank you, Nathan. Yeah, we're a little early on the planning side as far as if we would allow pets at the property. However, though, we, of course, would meet all requirements for Fair Housing Act requirements to allow assistance animals on the property, and look forward to doing so, working with the community. But as far as the general rules on pets allowed at the property, we haven't got that far in the planning.
Thank you. I think my questions came more along just because we've had issues with neighboring businesses on some of the buildings that we've constructed. Just ties into kind of disturbing the neighbors when it came to parking, and then, you know, trash issues. I think it was more curiosity than anything, if you guys had any plans for that down the road. But
We'll take that into consideration. Thank you.
And Joe McConnell, do you have a question?
Well, I certainly do. Thank you, Commissioner Boschert. My question is about the decision to, or the proposed, the proposal to reduce covered parking from 1/3 of all spaces to no spaces. And to me, it makes sense to possibly include some covered parking since this is senior housing. And, you know, I'm trying to imagine my grandparents or my parents going outside to brush off their car, I don't know, like 2 days ago. So what was the rationale behind no covered parking at all? Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Commissioner McConnell. I think that is probably best answered by the architect, by Gabe Bergeron. Although I will also point out that Nathan Lawrence did a very thorough analysis of the surrounding area and looked at other densities, other parking configurations, and I believe concluded that covered parking was actually rather an anomaly in this area. Uncovered parking was more in character. And Nathan may wish to speak to that more.
Yeah, so this is Gabe Bergeron. I can speak to, just from an architecture side and a site planning side, the scale of the parking lot is rather small, and the distances we're talking about from parking to structure are relatively short. But I think it's also with a consideration of what's the norm and what do we see in this area that we're looking at how that area is composed. Nathan, do you want to elaborate?
Sure. I think Jenny pretty much covered it, and Gabe referenced it as well, but there's really not a lot of covered parking for other multifamily projects. So in evaluating the applicant's request to not provide covered or garage parking, the planning staff thought that was a reasonable request.
Just one other thought there is this is, you know, close to public transportation, so the burden on vehicles, we're also thinking this is reduced. So.
Right. Thank you guys for that explanation. I appreciate it.
And David Carpenter, do you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have both. I also have a concern about the parking. I understand we're going to be giving the minimum spaces required, which is 1 per unit plus 1 per 5 units for guests, which is okay. I'm not saying we should have more necessarily, but I do think I am concerned about not having covered parking for a senior housing facility. Secondly, I'm also very concerned about the access from a one-way alley as the primary access for this site. that is not an alley that's necessarily easy to drive down. And if you have seniors driving down a difficult street, so that's going to cause a lot more possibility for accidents. And while the architect says it's near public transit, there are some transit, but it's really not that close to, it's not close to the commuter rail station. I mean, closer, I guess it's relatively closer than where I am out on the western side of Westminster, but it's not that close for seniors who are transit dependent. I'd certainly like to hear some more about that. I also have major concerns about stormwater. It looks like you're massing the entire property, and I know that it's just I know you're just drawing some boxes on the property right now, but I'm very concerned that there's going to be enough room to do stormwater management, stormwater detention on this site, especially since underground probably won't be allowed with the, since it's essentially a former gas station or been polluted by a former gas station. And then I also have major concerns about the setback reductions, and based on the massing diagram you showed, it looks like the sight line from 73rd on the Lowell is going to be pretty difficult to see. It looks like you're bumping right out there, so it's going to make it much harder to make a right turn on Red and some other things. So I see some traffic issues as well. So I know that's a lot. If you could address some of those, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. I think because of the range of questions, Nathan, if you're comfortable maybe taking the first portion and turning it over. Some of this is staff, and some of it I believe would be Studio Completiva to speak to the design solutions.
Sure, Jenny. I guess I think those are great questions dealing with the transportation. Heath Klein, our transportation engineer, is in the room. So I was wondering if Heath, if you could help address the issues of site visibility and the two-way traffic. I believe that the alley is two-way until the sort of southern half of it. But if you could sort of expand on that, Heath, thank you.
Yes, good evening, Planning Commission. Heath Klein, City's Transportation Engineer. And currently the alleyway is signed. There is not a signing of only one way. It is fairly narrow, and so it's uncomfortable to have two cars passing. But you can enter from 73rd, or you can actually go north from 72nd as well. So it is there. We have to maintain that open because there is the post office there just west of this property. And as far as the site triangle at 73rd and Lowell, that is a signalized intersection. And so, when you are, Commissioner Carpenter, thinking about taking that right turn, really what you are looking at is you'll be looking north to make sure that there isn't a southbound vehicle that you're turning out in front of. And really with the buildings being on the south side, the site triangle for a northbound car wouldn't come into play for that right turn. For turning left to northbound Lowell Boulevard, that is only allowed on the green, which is stopping the traffic on Lowell Boulevard from northbound and southbound. But in addition to that, we will make sure that the building does not impair the site triangle required for the pavement widths of Lowell Boulevard or 73rd. So we will make sure that that is, it does not create a hindrance to the sight lines. Thank you.
Thanks, Heath. Yeah, I think Gabe, if you could speak a bit to that sort of sightline issue. I think that the setback of the proposed building along that northern side might help alleviate that that concern.
Sure. Yes, so we're looking at this building and its edge along Lowell Boulevard essentially being a continuation of the edge, the building edge to the north there. So our setback is actually in alignment with the buildings that are to the north of 73rd along Lowell. And so that's with this idea that comes from the city's comprehensive plan and the consideration of this neighborhood to have a real gateway at this corner. And at the same time, we're setting back within the property line, I think something like not between 9 and 10 feet. And then there is a bulb turnout there. So I think we'll actually end up with a volume or the building volumes having a sense of a small front yard and stoops for the housing along Lowell. And I think that'll all contribute to a pretty good generous spacing for the site triangles. And we would, like Keith mentioned, of course, make sure that we're meeting the requirements for site triangles as they're fine.
Great, thank you, Gabe. I believe Michael Wright is on the call. I think, okay, she can hear us, but she can't interact with us. She's having some technical problems. I apologize for that. I see that Aaron Kirchner is in the room. I don't know if he is willing to kind of step in and just make some broad statements about sort of the stormwater requirements that will be reviewed along with the official development plan. Aaron, are you able to speak? Kind of putting him on the spot.
Hey, Nathan, actually, this is Matt. Michael, if you want to try, so I had muted Michael's mic. So Michael, you should be able to unmute yourself now and participate. So right now you're self-muted.
Planning Commission, this is Heath Klein again. So despite being the transportation engineer, I do work in the community development engineering division. And this site is less than an acre and as a total site. And so that is below the threshold for requiring on-site detention. But the developer is looking at trying to do water quality on the project. So what that means is wherever we can, we push the stormwater from the parking lots or the roof drains into landscaped areas. So that way, any of the pollutants and stuff we do not want carried into our stormwater settles in the medians, or not medians, but in the landscaped areas. So we will be pushing for that and working on that, but it is not required to have the on-site detention. Thank you.
Does that take care of your questions, Commissioner Carpenter?
That answers most of them. My comment is I still am concerned. I got that the alley assigned one way, at least north of Valenti's shopping center there. And I still have concerns about having that narrow access, and I would request the applicant, especially when they move into design development, that they look at having a widening that alley in order to provide easier passing for the residents of the new development. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Colling, do you have a question or a comment?
I actually had a question, but I think I found the answer to my question. My question was what the senior definition is, and I found it in the memo that it's 55. So not to give away my age or anything, but 55 is not that old. And so most 55 to 65 or even 75 can go out and clean their car off. So I guess I'm not as concerned about that. 17 units And it's people that kind of want to live in this more urban setting, where they're, I think that this building, being right up against the setback and kind of mimicking the other buildings in the area kind of creates this dynamic urban experience. And I think people that are living down there are wanting that kind of experience. And they may not even have a car. So I'm not as worried about that. So 55 isn't that old. That's my comment. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments from commissioners? Looks like we have no further comments or questions, so I would like to thank everyone for attending tonight's Planning Commission hearing. In just a moment, I will open the public hearing. To have your comments included as part of the official record, please call 303-706-3113 to leave a voicemail. After the tone, state your full name and address for the record. Your recording message will be limited to 5 minutes, so please be aware of the time as you give your comments. There will be no time warning, and the call will end after the 5-minute limit has expired. Your testimony will be played back before the close of the public hearing. And if you are having difficulties with the virtual meeting, please call 720-443-1516, and a staff person will try to assist you. This opportunity to leave a recorded message will be open for 15 minutes. So at this time, 8:09, I will open the public testimony by stating that testimony has been received in the form of emails and voicemails, and they have been put into the public record. Those who wish to give comments and signed up in advance per the online guides will be called upon to speak during the live meeting. Jennifer, do we have anyone who wishes to speak?
Yes, we have one speaker, and when you call their name, I will unmute them.
Okay. It looks like we have Gary Shea wishes to speak.
Hello?
I think we can hear you.
Okay. Chairman Boschert, thank you for the opportunity to participate this evening and the commissioners. My name is Gary Shea. I live at 3801 West 76th Avenue in the original part of Westminster. On the first page of your agenda memorandum this evening, the third strategic plan goal states beautiful, desirable, safe, and environmentally responsible city. This property that you're asked to approve for the zoning and the PDP for this evening is not a desirable location for residents to live. It is and has always been commercial property. It's not a safe or a healthy place for anyone to live, let alone low-income seniors, and I'm hoping to be able to demonstrate to you this evening. I've followed this project since the city first bought the property. They removed the active businesses that were there. They left the property vacant, and then it became blighted. Throughout the years of research, we have discovered a shocking level of hazardous materials that currently contaminate the ground. I think that the staff had mentioned too where that plume originated from. Earlier this year, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, Oil and Gas Division, in regards to the voluntary cleanup plan, issued the following findings, and I quote, "If fully and properly implemented, the plan will attain a degree of cleanup and control of hazardous substances and petroleum products such that the property does not present an unacceptable risk to human health or the environment based on the property's proposed future use, which is residential," end quote. When the first public hearing was proposed back in April of this year, we objected to the virtual meeting as it truly restricted the public input. At the March meeting, I attended in person and there was overwhelming opposition to this senior housing project. And that wasn't adequately recorded for you to reference tonight. To my knowledge, no other public meetings have been held, and your decision tonight will be based on limited, very limited public input. On the second page of the memorandum, under all alternatives, it states the Planning Commission could recommend denial of the zoning and the PDP to the City Council. I would strongly encourage that denial. And it also goes on to state this action would prevent this applicant from constructing a senior multifamily residential project, and the staff doesn't recommend that option. That statement isn't actually quite accurate because as the Planning Commission for a zoning change, you will only make a recommendation to the City Council. And if you sent it back to the City Council, that would put it into their agenda item, and that would make for the elected officials to approve this unsafe property moving forward. The reason this property is unsafe is because of the gasoline plume created by the leaking underground petroleum tanks at 7305 Lowell Boulevard across the street. It also states that the contamination monitoring is ongoing and may continue into the public right-of-way after the site is developed. So my first question is, were you shown the document that details the size, shape, and movement of the plume?
Is that a question for staff?
I would let you direct the question, Mr. Chairman.
And I would inquire of staff if that map was supplied in the packet.
This is Jenny Grafton. I think as the packet is produced by planning, it's probably most appropriate for planning staff to answer that. However, I'm not aware that it was provided as part of this particular application, simply because this is the rezoning. That graphic has been provided in other areas and will certainly factor in to future development processes. Nathan, do you want to add anything more to that?
Yeah, that information is not criteria that we review as part of a rezoning and PDP approval process. So that information would not be found in the packet, but I suppose Edie or anyone else could provide that information to the planning commissioners or anyone in the general public if they would like it.
Absolutely, it is publicly posted information.
Yes.
Okay. My next question would be, there's remediation and monitoring wells that are on the property. Do you currently know how many of those wells are on the property?
Again, Nathan, I would refer this to you.
I do not have that information. Again, that is not part of the criteria that we review as part of a rezoning and PDP application.
Thank you.
Okay, the agenda packet stated that those monitoring wells may remain active. My next question would be, how many of those wells will be contained within the confines of the residential walls and thereby expose these seniors to health hazards?
Mr. Shea, we're going to have you go ahead and finish your comments and questions, and then staff will answer them after you've finished.
Okay. The paragraph also states that the vacant and blighted commercial building currently on the site, these are city-owned properties and they should be maintained by the property. So we've been dealing with blighted properties since this property was first permitted. Were you provided current pictures of the current condition of the property? The next item is on page 5, the second criteria, the PDP exhibits an application of sound, creative, innovative, and efficient planning principles. This does not meet that criteria of sound planning in the health risk hazards to these seniors. Also under number 2, the TMUN design guidelines do not specify minimum building setbacks from rear property lines or from adjacent properties, but the intent is to minimize these setbacks to encourage a compact urban form. To my knowledge, and I've grown up in this part of town, there is no compact urban form that is down here. And it doesn't match any of the context in the neighborhood. Can you give me an example of the aligned setbacks and the 0-foot setbacks that other buildings in the neighborhood have? I'm not aware of any of that right now. I'd like to move on to parking on page 6 under the 3 exceptions. The final exception is to reduce the required proportion of covered or garage space parking for the seniors from 1/3 of the total required parking area down to none. I did drive by that area this evening specifically, and the multifamily housing units that are directly a half a block north have enclosed garages. The housing units directly a half a block to the west have enclosed housing units. So I don't think that that was accurate in the packet that you've got. According to the PDP sheet number 3, the only access to this property, and I think Commissioner Carpenter had touched on that, was the access through the public alley. So my concerns is, do any other senior housing projects that we have in the city now only have parking access through the alley? Is the alley currently or will it be in the future maintained for snow removal and the directional travel to prevent accidents? Also in the packet, the terms revitalization, enliven, revigor were used to sell this project. How does more low-income senior housing revitalize, enliven, or reinvigorate this historic part of the city? You as members of the Planning Commission now are in an awkward and difficult situation this evening. The applicant and the property owner are the City of Westminster. The very same staff who help you on a day-to-day basis are the ones that are representing the owner and the developer and are recommending to you to approve this zoning change and PDP plan. As a member of this commission, you were selected because of your common sense and reason. A reasonable person would say that this is an unhealthy place to live and that it can never be made safe. There are better property options available to the city to build this much needed affordable senior housing. Please do not approve the zoning change or PDP tonight. Let the zoning change go back to the city council, who are the elected officials, and let them make the final decision. That's all the comments I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shea. Nathan, do you want to address these questions now?
Yeah, I can sort of deal with the planning related questions. And then after that, I'll probably see if Jenny can kind of help coordinate the one dealing with the environmental issues. And please, I wrote down, I have kind of 3 areas of questioning. I hope I didn't miss anything. So it's dealing with the setbacks. Really all one has to do is pull up an aerial of the area to see numerous instances of 0 lot line setbacks. The Penguin building directly to the south has 0, is set at a 0 side lot line on either side. The post office would be another example, and I'm just looking at this block. Also further down the street towards 73rd, 7225 Lowell is also has 0 side lot lines. I could really go on, but that's just 3 examples on this block alone. The CRHDC building that's across the street to the north has a 0 lot line setback as well, and that's really what we're trying to mimic, as well as all the other sort of commercial businesses down 73rd. Many of those are set right on the sidewalk. And as you know, there's a series of buildings that have a 0 side setback as they're all sort of attached to one another. So I think that addresses that. The uncovered parking, again, just looking at an aerial, and then there was one included in the comparative study I did of the density. But if you look at that, you can see a lot of uncovered parking lots. In fact, I can't really see any that are covered. So all of the multifamily buildings that I referenced, I believe all of them, I'm just looking again, you can also see parked cars that are uncovered and are surface parked. And dealing with the access from the alley, again, I think, yeah, the Newton Square apartments that I used are accessed off the alley that runs north-south off of 73rd. The Newton Street apartments are accessed off of a north-south alley. Let's see, yeah, there's quite a few other examples. So it is quite prevalent in the area to have that access off of the alley. And I'll just reinforce that really is a real positive for the site layout of this project to maintain that consistency of the street wall along both 73rd and Lowell, because really this is a sort of gateway property. So we're trying to minimize curb cuts to reinforce the urban nature of this area and to create a walkable environment. And then I believe there was a comment that how does this project revitalize the area? As I mentioned, even in our neighborhood meeting, this project, one project by itself can't revitalize an entire area. However, as I stated in that meeting, this project certainly will help to catalyze the revitalization of the area. We are taking what is now a vacant building and transforming it into a new active use that'll have new residents that will be able to walk around in this area to visit the local commercial stores, and will really turn an eyesore into a positive. Really, any sort of redevelopment of this property would probably be a positive, but adding residents in this area that will be here, at different times of day from your typical worker is also a big positive. So those all echo comments that I shared in the neighborhood meeting. And I think that covered the planning related questions, unless I missed anything. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jenny, and she can kind of help with the environmental questions. Thank you.
Sure.
Before
Thank
we
you,
get, Jenny, before you comment, I would like to mention that the comment period for telephone call-in has ended, so we will not take any more phone call comments. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Boschert. So Nathan, I appreciate that. I think you actually did answer the vast majority of the questions. As you said, there were a couple of environmental ones. I'll just answer briefly, and then I'm going to ask Pat Lee to speak, since he has far greater technical expertise on this than I do. In response to the number of wells on the site, I believe it's approximately 10. However, the important thing to note is that all of them that are within the property boundaries will be removed prior to construction. These are monitoring wells, so the state is utilizing them to access and test the plume. They can't do that, of course, once a building is there, so they will establish different locations for the monitoring to take place. So to I think it was the third point Mr. Shea made about would there be any of the monitoring wells contained within the walls of the building, and the answer to that is no. Pat Lee, I believe, might be able to provide a little bit greater explanation of what sort of content is covered in that voluntary cleanup plan, and speak to kind of the standard language that is used to provide assurance that a property is being managed and remediated in a way that is appropriate to the proposed use, which in this case is residential. Pat, could you add a little more to that?
Sure thing, Jenny. Thanks. Thanks everyone for inviting me to this meeting. I appreciate the opportunity to provide some sort of insight into the environmental side of this property. First of all, there was a number of wells drilled on the property, probably in the neighborhood of about 20 of them. Most of them were temporary wells. That is, they were just drilled that the day that they tested the groundwater, soil and groundwater, and then they were backfilled and filled back in and plugged. Going forward, I would imagine, like you say, Jenny, they will probably remove a lot of these wells in just the excavations that'll occur, especially up in the, right on the corner of the, if that building's going to be on the corner, then these monitoring wells are going to be totally removed. They'll be plugged and plugged according to state standards. And then new monitoring wells will probably be drilled either right on West 73rd on the, we might even leave one of the monitoring wells right there that exists already, and then drill probably another one downgrading closer to the Penguin building. So you're going to have two or three wells left on site. They're not going to be in the building foundation, as Jenny has said. They're going to be exterior. There's a plug in the pipe in the monitoring well, and then once those plugs are in place, that can be removed and you can retest the well from time to time. But then you also put a metal cap that's bolted down so that there's no way that any kind of vapor or fumes may emit from that monitoring well going forward. And as far as just the proper management of a property that has been contaminated with gasoline byproducts, the OPS, the Oil and Public Safety Group within the state of Colorado, and the Colorado Department of Public Health almost work together in assuring that the type of work that is done to eliminate the impacts of gasoline plumes is completed properly. And then there's the plan going forward, the VCOP portion, which is with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, that has a soil management plan in it that is very strict and in its requirements and how soils will be handled on site, and which ones will go to the landfill and which ones can remain on site based on the concentrations of the contaminants in the soils, if there are any. I think that kind of answers the question, Gary, but let me know if it has not.
All right. Thank you, Pat. And I don't know, Chairman Boschert, if that may be a helpful time to pause if there's any more technical questions from the commissioners. If not, I can move on to the other points Mr. Shea raised.
Well, I have one quick question. Is the remediation already underway? And if so, when do you anticipate it will be completed?
No, the remediation has not been completed. There was some soil vapor extraction equipment that was associated with the property to the north on the north side of 73rd. That was part of the original gas station problem, and they had some piping that extended onto the city's property, but that system has been shut down and not necessary to maintain operations because it wasn't lowering the concentrations any more than economically, I guess, required. I guess a better way to say that is that the system was effective, but then just and reduced the concentrations down to a level where it wasn't getting any better. But it was in low concentrations. It was a very successful remediation, but that portion of the remediation is now has stopped. But as far as the future remediation, that would be involved with the actual development of the property, where we'd actually come on site with excavation equipment, dig the soils out, determine which soils were clean, which ones were not, then and completely continue doing confirmation testing to make sure that there was no contaminated soils left on site. And then that's where we are with that. So the real remediation on the city's property will not occur until excavation starts.
That's exactly what I needed to know. Thank you. Looks like Joe McConnell has a question. Joe?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Boschert. My question, Pat, is if we were discussing a retail or a commercial project tonight, everything we've talked about as far as monitoring and remediation would be the same, correct?
Yes, it would. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Pat.
Okay. Does staff wish to answer more questions at this time, or do you want comments from commissioners?
Commissioner Boschert, I can just close real briefly. I think actually where Pat left off is a good segue into the other point that I had made note of for Mr. Shea regarding the condition of the property. So there are both I would call it more technical environmental components that Pat Lee has assisted with. There's also a separate line known as the environmental review process that HUD requires. That is both the technical side of it as well as a very prescriptive sort of order of operations that allows us to move forward with activities on a project where federal funds are involved. And so in addition to this sort of standard phase 1, phase 2, VCUP processes, there's also the HUD environmental review. We have not been allowed to demolish the building until we receive clearance from HUD that allows us to do so. There were a number of environmental reports that needed to be provided to HUD to achieve that. We have recently received the verbal okay from them. We are still awaiting the formal written authorization to proceed with demolition, which we anticipate any day now. As soon as we have that, we are prepared to put the project out for bid so that demolition can commence as soon as possible. And I think with that I believe answers the points. The only other one perhaps was if there was any additional desire to speak to the alley access, which would be best handled by Heath Klein as the traffic engineer.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Yes, so if this is to move forward, we will take a look at the improvements to the alleyway. It will always remain open to the public. And with the development, we are looking to make that a little bit wider on their side so that it is easier to get into and out of. Regarding snow removal, I would have to check on the city's policy for snow removal. Being an alleyway, traditionally, these are not locations that do get snow removal, but that is something that I can bring up and we can have those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, I'd like to close the public hearing and ask commissioners if they have any further questions or comments. I would like to make a quick comment that the staff and applicant panelists have been very informative. You really know your business, and I'm thankful you were able to answer all of our questions. It's been very helpful. Any other comments from commissioners? Since this is a two-part motion or two-part application, we will need two motions. I will at this time call for the first motion on this item. Do we have anyone brave enough to make a motion? Commissioner Colley.
A motion, yes. I would like to make a motion that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council the approval of the rezoning from C1 Commercial District to Planned Unit Development for the Harris Park Block 43 Senior Housing totaling 0.60 acres. This is based on the findings that the rezoning generally complies with the criteria in the Westminster Municipal Code Section 11-5-14A.
Do we have a second?
I'd like to second Commissioner Bosch.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a motion before us. Any discussion? Seeing none. Oh, Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm looking at this and I'm really wondering if this meets all of the criteria that's in our standards to approve it. Because there's definitely an argument that it does not exhibit the application of sound sound planning principles, part of bullet point 2. And I don't know that they really warranted the setback change in number 3. But really, and then I'm a little concerned about using this commercial site as a purely residential site, which puts it into points 5 and 6. The PDP provides for the protection of the development from potentially adverse surrounding influences. That's where we don't have all the answers on the benzene and the gas leaks yet, and I know that's not going to get cleaned up until something happens, but that hasn't really been answered, and we don't really know that it's not going to have that 0.6, that it's not going to have significant adverse impacts upon the future land uses. So I'm really torn in voting for this. Right now, I'm kind of leaning to vote against it, but that's kind of what I'm seeing right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Xiong.
Yes. So first I want to thank staff for providing a wonderful presentation and the desire to provide some form of equity with affordable housing for seniors. However, I want to echo the concerns of Commissioner Carpenter. I'm concerned about whether or not this really meets the criteria for bullet point 2 and 3 with setbacks and such forth. And so I just wanted to make a public statement for that.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I would like to comment that I believe staff and the applicant have answered and addressed many of the issues that we brought up and that some of the public testimony brought up. And I think they have gone out of their way to make sure this project will take care of the remediation, the setbacks, and the traffic in the alley. They've stated that they will consider widening the alley, and they've shown that zero setback is common in this neighborhood, and they've got a remediation plan that seems to be very airtight. So I'm inclined to support this project. It's much needed in this area, and that is a wonderful part of Westminster that could use the revitalization. Any other comments? Seeing none, I will call the question. Let's have a roll call vote, please.
Chairperson Boschert.
Aye.
Chairperson Boschert is in favor. Vice Chair McConnell.
Aye.
Vice Chair McConnell is in favor. Commissioner Carpenter.
Nay.
Commissioner Carpenter is opposed. Commissioner Calling.
Aye.
Commissioner Calling is in favor. Commissioner Tomacek.
I vote nay.
Commissioner Tomacek is opposed. Commissioner Zhang.
Nay.
Commissioner Zhang is opposed. Commissioner Torres.
Aye.
Commissioner Torres is in favor. Vote is complete.
Well, the motion passes 4-3. Do any other commissioners wish to state why they voted against?
I do. Chairman Boschert. This is Dave Tomacek. For similar reasons, I don't believe we've met criteria 2. 7 bothers me a lot with the alley, even with improvements. That's not exactly the best place to be making a primary drive, particularly since it's not well taken care of, even in the best of times.
Thank you. I guess Mr. Carpenter and Mr. Zhang have stated their opposition. Do you wish to state anything further?
Nothing for me.
Thank you.
Nothing for me.
Very good. One quick comment. This is only a recommendation. The city council has final say on this, so there is much more opportunity for public comment. All right, I need a motion for the second part of this application. Do we have a brave commissioner willing to make a motion? Commissioner Calling.
I would like to make a motion that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council the approval of the preliminary development plan for Harris Park, Block 43, senior housing. This is based on the findings that the proposed plan generally complies with the criteria in the Westminster Municipal Code, Section 11-5-14A.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Commissioner McConnell.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. We have a motion before us. Any discussion? Commissioner Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the reasons I stated before, I will be voting nay on this motion as well.
Very good. Thank you. Commissioner Zhang,
For the same reasons, I would be voting no.
and Commissioner Tomacek.
Same.
Thank you. In that case, I will call the question. Please cast your vote by roll call.
Chairperson Boschert.
Aye.
Chairperson Boschert is in favor. Vice Chair McConnell.
Nay.
Vice Chair McConnell is not in favor. Commissioner Carpenter.
Nay.
Commissioner Carpenter is not in favor. Commissioner Tomacek.
I believe you've skipped over Commissioner Colling.
I did. I apologize. I got ahead of myself.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Calling.
Aye.
Commissioner Calling is in favor. Commissioner Tomacek.
Nay.
Commissioner Tomacek is not in favor. Commissioner Zhang.
Nay.
Commissioner Zhang is not in favor. Commissioner Torres.
Aye.
Commissioner Torres is in favor. Vote is complete.
So the motion fails on a 3-4 vote. And I believe everyone except Commissioner McConnell has stated their reasons why. Do you wish to comment, Joe?
Oh, I'd be more than happy to. Thank you, Commissioner Boschert. I viewed the zoning change and the PDP as unique and separate, right? So the PDP, that's a zoning change that to me makes sense. It brings us into PUD and it becomes more flexible as time goes on, regardless of what happens tonight with this second motion. And for all of the reasons that Commissioner Carpenter, Tomacek, and Zhang stated earlier, that pretty well summarizes my opposition to the PDP amendment.
Very good, thank you. So we had two motions, one to recommend and one to not recommend to the City Council. Jennifer, can you tell us when the City Council will be taking up this measure?
Yes, let me look at that up for you. Just a moment, please.
Okay, sorry I caught you off guard there. While we're waiting,
I'm sorry, November the 23rd.
November the 23rd, thank you.
Yes.
In that case, do we have any old business that we need to address at this time? Any miscellaneous business? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, staff and applicant.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Night, everyone.
Night, everybody.